This episode of Unqualified Opinions is brought to you by Hirechain. Your next hire could come from anywhere: a recruiter, a job board, a referral network, or a conference. Hirechain manages hundreds of candidate sources for you, so you only see relevant applications and can focus on picking the best person for your team. On average, our customers fill open roles faster and 30% cheaper than with traditional recruiters. Leading companies like The Graph and Messari already use Hirechain. So get your time back. Talk to Hirechain today and hire the best, fast. Visit hirechain.io/Messari for prioritized onboarding. This podcast is meant for informational purposes only and is not meant to serve as investment advice. Hosts and guests may hold cryptocurrencies discussed in this episode. Opinions expressed may not reflect the opinions of Messari.
When growing a new product, every founder has to solve problems. Sometimes those problems are bad problems, like customer churn, competitive threats, or departures of key talent. 4 years ago, Ethereum founder Vitalik Buterin faced a good problem.
Ethereum is kind of lapping the field when it comes to what users are actually willing to pay to access that commodity product, right? Ethereum users are paying on average $10 million a day to access that block space. So the one question you have to ask is, what's accounting for those differences? And one of the fundamental reasons is because Ethereum has been able to generate a network effect around its applications deployed, developers, users, capital, and liquidity in applications.
The Layer 1 blockchain had exploded in popularity, but at that time, Ethereum wasn't built to handle that much activity. Ethereum was built to be highly secure and reliable, but not necessarily lightning fast or cheap. Transaction fees to use Ethereum became prohibitively high, forcing many apps built on Ethereum to shut down. Vitalik and his team had anticipated this and released a roadmap to address it. But even they admitted that, quote, base layer scalability for applications is only coming as the last major phase of that roadmap, which was still years away. So Vitalik delivered a clear message to Ethereum's developer community. If Ethereum were to continue to grow in the near and mid-term, it would likely need to be all in on rollups. The idea behind rollups is to essentially outsource the most resource-constrained part of operating a blockchain, the actual compute of the transaction, to a new second layer called a rollup. Once that's completed, the rollups store the confirmed transaction data back on Ethereum.
Rollups are ultimately going to bring the cost of goods sold, that cost of call data, is coming down substantially, which increased the gross margin from something like 25% to up to 70 or 80% plus, which is a really interesting business model when you think about high scale, high gross margin businesses with extremely low or net or zero OPEX.
Generally speaking, this strategy worked extremely well. Developers built rollups, transaction fees stabilized, and Ethereum's token price soared from just under $400 when he announced his rollup vision to over $4,000 12 months later. Rollups started to accumulate active addresses in the beginning of 2023, and as of April 2024, Messari data shows that the 9 largest Ethereum Layer 2 rollups combined have more than 3 times the number of daily active addresses than Ethereum itself. But these rollups are starting to run into growth problems of their own, and as newer alternatives to Ethereum that offer faster settlement times and cheaper fees are proving reliable at scale, the future of Ethereum may hinge on its developer community's ability to build the key tools that allow it to grow again. I'm Seth Bloomberg, and here's the story.
Messari's annual conference Mainnet returns this fall, September 30th through October 2nd. Now in its 4th year, Mainnet is the largest annual crypto event in New York, featuring leaders from crypto, Wall Street, and Washington. Join 3,000 attendees this year to hear from leaders like Cathie Wood, Hester Peirce, and Chris Dixon talk about what's in store for this year, 2025, and beyond. We'll cover the explosion of real-world assets on-chain, the industry's physical infrastructure, the codependent relationship of crypto and AI, the continued growth of smart contract platforms, acceleration of institutional products. We've got it all. Mainnet's your opportunity to meet hundreds of projects shaping the future of crypto and the institutional investors and capital allocators helping to fuel their development. You can enjoy a 20% discount using discount code MessariPod when registering at mainnet.events. Interested in a prominent presence at this year's mainnet? Snag a meeting room or a booth and contact events at Messari.io to explore all mainnet has to offer.
Obviously, there's a lot of things to consider with this. We've never built these kind of systems before, and I think that a lot of people are afraid of building in the modular context just because it is so new and there are a lot of open questions.
Hey Seth, how's it going?
Hey Ryan, thanks for having me.
In your intro, we heard you and Will Nelly of Galaxy Ventures lay out the promising business case for rollups. But we also just heard Stephanie Dunbar, now of Fluent, talk about how intimidating building them can be. You are Messari's expert on all things Ethereum, rollups, zero knowledge, and you put out some research recently that highlighted the critical moment that ecosystem is in right now.
Yeah, especially with the growing popularity of other layer ones like Solana, the Ethereum ecosystem seems to be again at something of an inflection point, especially with regards to scalability.
Can you just remind people how we got here and what some of the key developments have been?
Sure. So in 2020, Vitalik laid out his vision for Ethereum's future powered by rollups, and two primary types of rollups came out of that: optimistic rollups and zero knowledge or ZK rollups. To oversimplify, the most resource-constrained function a layer 1 performs is the act of verifying a transaction as valid. Optimistic and ZK rollups both address this problem, but in two very different ways. Let's say user A says, I want to send 10 units to user B. Before the layer 1 will let that happen, it needs to confirm that user A has those 10 units to send to user B. Optimistic rollups assume that all transactions that a wallet tries to execute are valid, and relies on incentivized third parties to produce a certain type of proof that a transaction is invalid. ZK rollups take a much different approach. Instead of relying on users to watch the network and detect invalid transactions, every transaction is always cryptographically proven to be valid. There are a ton of practical differences that come out of these two approaches to verification, but the one key one I should highlight here is the difference in settlement times. Optimistic rollups can't settle a transaction until they give their users time to challenge a transaction. They inherently need to set these challenge periods, which can last multiple days. But since ZK proofs by default have to validate every transaction, they get started on that immediately, so transactions are typically settled in a matter of minutes, not days. This doesn't mean that ZK rollups are inherently better or worse than optimistic rollups, just that they're designed to serve different use cases. And generally speaking, both offer dramatic improvements in cost and speed over processing a transaction directly on Ethereum L1.
You mentioned that those rollups now make up roughly 3/4 of all unique daily active addresses on the Ethereum ecosystem. So clearly Vitalik's rollup vision has come into focus. But those rollups are also running into problems now, right?
Yeah, I think it's becoming the norm for a net new user to have their first interaction be with a rollup instead of Ethereum directly, which is a huge change, but one that many believe is necessary for the ecosystem to grow. There are two broad types of problems they're running into. First is the simple cost and ability to build, maintain, and evolve these rollups. It's really challenging as a founding team starting one of these projects to be best in class at all the different technical pieces associated with rollups that their customers need. So what we're seeing is that many rollups are actually becoming specialists who then benefit from interacting with other specialists. Loosely, this is analogous to the API-based microservices economy that became so popular in the Web 2 world over the last decade or so. And this is where ZK rollups start to separate themselves from optimistic rollups. Technically speaking, it's much easier to make a ZK rollup interoperable than it is to make an optimistic rollup interoperable. Now, to help these rollups come to market, we're seeing a couple of different key elements emerge.
Something to watch out for are rollups as a service providers to help make building rollups easier for developers. So rollups as a service specifically, it's like a traditional SaaS model where a rollup developer can come and say, okay, I want to build this application. And all they really know is that they're selecting from an interface, and in a few clicks they have a rollup that does the function that they want to have. So a rollup is only as strong as its weakest layer, and this is certainly a concern, but there's also the ability for a rollup developer to choose from a bunch of specialized providers and make the trade-off between cost and security that they're comfortable with. In addition, the teams that are focusing on each layer are specialized and optimized for that function, so they're not thinking about all of the other layers and the security guarantees that would otherwise they'd have to think about if they were building a full blockchain.
The first are rollup development stacks, like Polygon's Chain Development Kit. These enable rollup developers to easily spin up a rollup. The second are rollup as a service providers. These teams integrate with these rollup development stacks, and they also integrate with other critical rollup infrastructure, and more broadly can help rollup developers navigate what can be a very complicated process. Historically, developing and operating a ZK rollup required significant funding, deep R&D, and likely a team of cryptography experts. But now, thanks to teams like Polygon, Succinct, Risk Zero, and many others, ZK AVMs, or more general ZK VMs, are dramatically more easily accessible to rollup creators.
That's how you know crypto is going mainstream, when VC investment theses start to end in as a service.
There's no escaping it.
Okay, and the second problem?
The second problem is just sheer ZK compute power. These rollups have designed great systems to quickly process these transactions, but they still need the hardware and the node operators to actually execute on them. So we're seeing the emergence of ZK-proof marketplaces. Proof marketplaces are simply a place to go to access ZK-proof compute capacity. A rollup sets its demand-side needs, a node operator offers its supply-side compute, and off they go. This is obviously a significantly more efficient way to power these rollups, and to bring it back to Vitalik's original problem from 4 years ago, should continue to drive down transaction costs even further. The rollup industry is really just doing the same thing Ethereum did, and many industries have done for decades: outsource their most difficult problems to specialists who can do it faster, better, and cheaper. When done well, which is no guarantee, it can be a reliable way to allow individual companies and industries as a whole to scale.
One thing we've noticed, there's a lot of excitement about this modular future and everyone transitioning individual apps into rollups. What's been, I'd say, a frustration and a part of it is our own failure as well. No one's done a great job of illustrating what is that going to look like when you're now dealing between 5-6 rollups. What are the baked-in assumptions? And I think that lack of understanding, we encounter it all the time now as teams are, call it halfway done with their transition from an app on an L1 to an app-specific rollup, that they're like, oh shit, did not think of that. Wait, so that's going to happen?
That was John Cole of Hyperlane talking about one of the pieces of the space he thinks needs more work: interoperability. How do you think the developer community has done, broadly speaking, in executing against Vitalik's original rollup vision from 4 years ago? And what are the challenges you think that still need to be addressed?
There are a tremendous number of talented developers building in the rollup space. Just a couple of years ago, it was often considered impossible or infeasible to reach even the current performance levels that ZK rollups are seeing. ZK compute is still relatively expensive. That's definitely an area for improvement, and we're already starting to see some early traction there too. But it feels like we're sort of at an inflection point now, and I expect to see more and more applications tap into ZK technology sooner rather than later.
Okay, that's all clear. But ultimately, why should we care about this? What's the impact?
Ethereum was the first chain with smart contract functionality to become a brand that extended beyond core crypto people into the awareness of the general public. And as a result, a ton of projects were built on top of it. It became the industry standard to launch your token on. It became the backbone of a lot of the first blockchain projects that addressed the end user. And that number of projects, both in the infrastructure layer and the end user layer, is only going to continue to grow. But if Ethereum and its ecosystem can't evolve to handle that growth, other layer ones are ready to take that market share. We are already seeing signs of this. Solana is a very popular place for a lot of DeepIn and AI projects to launch their tokens. Ordinals on Bitcoin are taking attention away from NFTs on Ethereum. Ethereum is the massive incumbent that still has a dominant presence at the end of the day. But tech history of all types, not just crypto, is littered with incumbents that blew a large head start to a more nimble challenger. These new developments, ZK-proof marketplaces, rollups as a service providers, are definitely promising, but they're no guarantee. And if they can't deliver, the projects that will drive the end user adoption that we all think is coming to the industry won't hesitate to look elsewhere if they're not getting what they need from Ethereum.
Seth, thanks.
This episode was written and produced by Steve Bichimer, based on a report I wrote called A Deep Dive into Proof Marketplaces, written for Messari's enterprise research product in April 2024. To read the latest on ZK rollups, marketplaces, and why I think ZK rollups are set to see a wave of growth, please consider subscribing to Messari Pro at messari.io.